And we are live.
You've never said it that way before.
No, I'm trying to vary it up now. We are 544 episodes in, and I've said it the same way too many times. I'm going to start making changes.
Great.
It is Thursday, November 4th, 2021, one day before Guy Fawkes Day. At this time tomorrow, there will be bonfires all over the United Kingdom.
In honor of Ben's birthday.
No, not a single one of them will be in honor of my birthday. They will all be in honor of the one holiday in the world dedicated to the failure of non-state actors to take down state power. The British Parliament stands to this day. It is 5:02 p.m. and we are talking about here to talk about Igor Danchenko, the latest indictee of the John Durham investigation. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but Igor Danchenko is really not allowed to have fun anymore. He's been indicted for 5 incidents of false statements, as best as I can tell, 3 or 4 of which are the same false statement.
As far as we know. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna do weird winking and dropping in things to add doubt to whatever certainty that you say, and I'm just going to do that throughout this entire show.
All right, that's what Kate is going to do.
Yep.
We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Pete Strzok.
Why does he still hang out with us?
I don't know. It's like he's
the dog shirts.
At this point.
The dog shirts are truly pushing the envelope of my.
So wait, are you Pete? Is the rumor that I hear that you're going to be on Rachel Maddow's show later this evening?
I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. There is a rumor, but I don't know.
If it is true, it will be the first time, I think, that somebody has ever done In Lieu of Fun and then slummed it with Rachel Maddow the same day.
And with that sort of lead up the last time, if it does happen.
All right.
Yeah.
Igor Danchenko. Let's start, for those who have not read the indictment or read the news coverage. Pete, who is he and what is he accused of?
Well, so he was identified in this reporting and earlier through various declassifications of U.S. government documents as a primary subsource of Christopher Steele, who was a...
And what does that mean?
So
everybody
sources
calls him the primary subsource, though it's one word. But what is a primary subsource?
So when I say source, I want to say a couple of things. One, a source could be anybody that the FBI receives information from. It could be somebody on kind of the far end of the spectrum, a confidential human source, somebody who's recruited, they're doing responsive to FBI tasking, they're on the books, they're frequently paid, or, there's a formal sort of process. But that is the one edge of when I say the word source of the FBI, that's a really broad category of people. It can be somebody who walks in a document to a complaint desk, somebody who calls in, somebody who sends in an email tip, your mother, a newspaper article, an attorney going to visit the general counsel of the FBI to provide information. When I say source, I mean all of that. And that doesn't, when I'm saying source, I don't mean somebody who is on the books. Because typically a source on the books is, in the national security context, classified. Certainly in the criminal context, law enforcement sensitive, and we don't talk about it because that's part of what we assure people if they do enter into a confidential human source relationship with us, that we'll keep that secret unless the Donald Trump administration comes along and under, DNI Ratcliffe and any number of people with the agreement of AG Barr and others simply declassify a whole raft of not only source identifiers, confidential human source identifiers, but release transcripts recorded by confidential human sources that allow for their identification and otherwise generally do a horrible, chilling job of on our ability to recruit people. So through this whole process of the IG report, the aftermath, Christopher Steele was identified as a FBI confidential human source. going back for some time, who was providing information to the FBI on a variety of topics, including what is commonly now known as the dossier, which was a collection of reports that he had assembled and provided to the FBI in the July 2016 timeframe to the agent who was his handler. They eventually came to the team working the Russia investigations in September of 2016. As it turns out, these are written and appear in a way that you see, they look like raw intelligence reporting of a certain type. And Steele was previously employed by a friendly foreign government. I don't think the specific government or the agency within that government had been declassified, although it's certainly been widely speculated about.
I have
And
a
as it
quick
turned,
question.
go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So, just because I am I have not been following this at all. Surprise, surprise. When it comes to anything national security related. But so wait, the Steele dossier. So Christopher Steele was a confidential informant to the U.S. Yes.
To the FBI.
To the FBI.
Right. And I don't want to say anything beyond his
But
relationship with the
why
FBI,
would he be an
confirming or denying
informant
anything
with
like
the FBI and not the CIA?
Any number of reasons. I mean, depending on the information somebody has, if they're providing information, say, on a criminal matter, I think it has been.
I mean, yeah, I guess I just mean like if all of the stuff that he was dumping on was Russian and seemed like he was employed by a foreign.
But it started, and I think things have been declassified that he had provided some, as we understood it at the time, had provided some information on corruption within FIFA. Now, what that actually turned out to be is a matter of some dispute, what we understood at the beginning versus what that actually amounted to. But the point being that in the course of his professional work after leaving government service, as he came across information, he would on occasion provide that to the FBI. And he did, my understanding is when he came to the FBI with this reporting about Russian contacts, particularly on and related to the Trump campaign, he was doing that for work on another client, on behalf of another client, was concerned about it, and came and sort of of his own accord provided it to the FBI. So there are a variety of reports, a lot of them, some salacious, the most kind of famous in public awareness is the allegations that there's some sort of P-tape, or at least that, Trump had gotten the presidential suite at a hotel in Moscow and either hired prostitutes or got women to, engage in golden showers to somehow, stick it to Obama because Obama had stayed there. That was the most salacious, but kind of the least relevant of what the allegations were that were in
Says
there.
you.
But
sorry. Anyway.
says yeah, no, but I mean that's part of the problem too, because I mean that was a lot of the things. The Steele material, and then it was promptly, we had it, but it was all around town. John McCain had it, other congressmen, senators had it, the media had it. It was all over the place, and because it became public very quickly, and it seized the public imagination in the sense of it presented a story of what collusion might look like. And the unfortunate part was lost in that was any sort of nuance of this is one way things might exist, but there are 1,000 other ways, many more likely, that problematic counterintelligence behavior might exist. But everybody was focused on the dossier, and then it became almost this sort of like dispositive test. Did these things occur? And if so, it's horrible. And if they didn't, well, then Trump must be innocent and there must be no wrongdoing. And within those reports, there are a variety, when you read them, they're sourced to a variety of people, source A, source B, source C, and variously described as, government employees or hotel employees or whatever the case may be. And so what the Bureau did is the Bureau frequently does when you get information, you try and dig down and figure out, okay, who are these sources of information? What is the basis of their knowledge?
Who are the sources of information that Steele is channeling in the dossier?
Right. Yes.
Great. Okay.
Yes. And so when he says source A said he overheard a conversation, well, okay, who is source A? Is this somebody who like works in a government ministry and pulled out a documentary file that had that information? Is source A somebody who is a gossip peddler? Is source A somebody who's actually a conduit for Russian disinformation? I mean, these were all things that were in our mind. And part of the reason the FBI spent a lot, in my opinion, maybe too much, but spent a lot of time trying to track down all the information within Steele's reporting. So on the one hand, who are these people that are reporting this? Two, whether or not this information is accurate. And then three, the ultimate goal, of course, is to figure out, okay, not only is the information in the reporting reliable, but can these people give us more? Because they hint or provide some information about allegations, but you really want to get behind that and say, okay, if it is accurate, then tell me more, give me more information, because this is, it's not that it's nebulous, but it is something that points to potentially, allegedly much bigger problems. And again, this happens all the time. All the time, sources walk in with information that you don't just inevitably, you don't know what it is. You don't know why a source is telling you that. You don't know if they're lying to you. You don't know if they're being, you know, wittingly or unwittingly played by a foreign government, by some bad actor. And so the process of intelligence collection and analysis does this sort of thing all the time. And there are all kinds of armchair, CI experts that have been created over the past 3 or 4 years, either on the Twitter or on Congress, who are like, this is some great revelation that this could have been Russian disinformation. Well, fucking
Right.
shit.
Right.
We deal with that every single day for the past 40 years.
I will say
And
it's
so,
not so
you know, it's
different
not,
than like
it's
when a
this,
source comes to you as like a journalist out of nowhere, or like whatever, or like when right,
Correct.
like, or like anything. Like it's like everyone always has like some fucking agenda, like right.
As I told Pete's class the other day, there are no two professions more similar than the intelligence community and the journalistic community, and neither of them recognize it. So Igor Danchenko,
right, and
the primary
right, and so
source of Chris Steele, and thus the subsource of the FBI.
Right, and so as the FBI starts digging into Steele's material, we figure out a couple of things. One, a lot of this information, it isn't the kind of structure where Steele is sitting on top and has many lines to different sources. It increasingly becomes apparent that Steele has a line to Danchenko, and then Danchenko has a variety of sources. Again, this isn't unusual.
We just call him Igor because, like,
we can call him Igor. We can call him whatever you want. And so, again, not unusual. It is hard for an FBI agent or CIA officer to run a source or series of sources in Iran or Russia or the PRC. Frequently, you'll find it. So you have like somebody who travels into Iran or the PRC or Russia or wherever, and then they're going in and they're talking to different people. So again, this construct of, instead of a guy at top with many lines to somebody relying on it is not unusual. I think it was a bit, as we came to understand it, a bit surprising that we didn't understand that there's this heavy reliance on Danchenko. But then what you see too is that then Danchenko, as a primary subsource, has himself subsources, and then that the same question, but it's like, all right, well, this is a little more removed. This is not initially what we our understanding of the material from Steele. There's an additional player in here, so we try and figure out who Danchenko is. And as you see in the indictment, I think I counted them up. The indictment lays out at least 7 interviews. The first one identified as January 24th of 2017, and the last November 16th of 2017. Again, as I teach my class that Ben alluded to, if you actually go through an indictment and read it with rigor and set up a timeline and put little data points about every single event that they talk about, you can get an extraordinary amount of information about what was known when. And they talk about, the first January 24th and 25th, he talked to the FBI in a FBI facility in Washington, D.C., whereas, later in March or May or whenever it was, he was talking in EDVA. So you can get a lot of information. But at the end of the day, what the indictment alleges is there were, and I agree with Ben, substantively 2 false statements. They make that into 5 charges, but there's one that he denied having contact with somebody who's identified as a U.S. Public relations executive, or I forget the exact term. And that 2, that he then on a series of occasions lied about his interactions with an individual who also isn't named. Both of these folks have been accurately speculated about online. But the second person, that he lied when he said he had contact with this person, and he in fact attributed information to this person that was not from them. And then he, having said that lie, he kind of sticks to it 3 more times, and Durham makes that into 4 counts of a false statement, which
There are 4 separate counts?
5.
Yes.
5?
Well,
one
total
that
5.
he lied. One that he lied about his
lie about the PR executive, 4 about the same lie, essentially, about the Russian Chamber of Commerce guy. Now, what's interesting about that is I cannot tell you, both personally and agents I've supervised, any number of kind of conversations with AUSAs when you're like, yeah, well, the guy keeps lying about it. They're like, look, that's one lie. That's one false statement. That is 1001 count. Even if they told a lie, they stick to it. They keep telling you the lie. You're not doing things or doing things because it, again, that there is, I think, probably some prosecutorial discretion there, but we can talk to kind of the reasons why that bothers me a little bit later on. But that's essentially a too long-winded explanation of
no, not long-winded at all. That was great.
And one more thing.
Let's distill it for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Igor Danchenko, primary source of Chris Steele, that is the person who actually gathers the information that appears in the famed Steele dossier.
Who is himself the source to the FBI.
Steele is the source to the FBI. The Steele dossier is, of course, the famed Steele dossier. We'll go into that in a minute. This guy is accused of lying to the FBI about how he gathered the information on 5 different occasions and 2 different subjects. Is that a fair?
Yes.
And to nail it down a little bit more precisely, both lies are allegedly designed to make it seem like he is developed information himself, whereas in fact, John Durham alleges he's merely recycling garbage that a PR exec gave him.
Well, developed from other sources.
Yes, exactly.
He himself developed it from different sources, not a PR executive. In fact,
Durham alleges he's just recycling bullshit that some PR executive gave him, and he's dressing it up as something that he didn't get from that PR executive.
Right, and regardless of whether or not it's bullshit, I think I would say, look, reading this, in my mind, it is, if these allegations are true, these are legitimate criminal charges.
Wait, reading the indictment? Yeah.
Reading the indictment, indictment, and comparing it to the indictment of Sussman. This indictment of Danchenko strikes me as
wait a minute.
You don't want to get there.
I want to come to that in a minute.
Okay.
I want to set up the conversation a little more before we do. So here I have to make a disclosure, and it's relevant to the point that Pete is going to make. The indictment alleges, and it has been reported in various newspapers, that Igor Danchenko was once an employee of the Brookings Institution. The New York Times ran a story some months back that the Brookings Institution received a subpoena in connection with this investigation. So Danchenko worked for the Brookings Institution something like a decade ago. And to my knowledge, I have never met him. And I was there at the time. And it's certainly possible that we, said hello in the cafeteria or something, you run into people. But I am if I've ever met Igor Danchenko, I'm certainly unaware of it. And despite what one may hear in certain corners of the right-wing media ecosystem, I have literally nothing to do with any of the events in question. I learned about the Steele dossier roughly around the time I was, as Susan Hennessy and I wrote at the time, that it was released. We were given a copy of the Steele dossier in advance of its release because we were asked what we made of it. We assessed it. We did not publish it, and I played no role in significant promotion of it. It's never been something that I particularly believed was all that significant. And so I need to make that disclosure before we go on. let's now go on. I read this indictment expecting to say this is another John Durham Sussman like situation where I think the indictment is sort of outrageous on its face. I did not react that way. I looked at it and said, wait a minute, if these allegations are true, it may be a little bit overcharged, but it's basically a righteous case. This is somebody who shows up, lies to the FBI about his, and creates a lot of work for you guys and eventually the Mueller investigation in a needless work, frankly, in identifying where information did and didn't really come from. And if I were John Durham and these facts were true, and again, let's assume for a minute that these are provable allegations, and of course, Mr. Danchenko is innocent till proven guilty, I would have brought this case. What do you think? Do you look at this and say this is a Sussman-like situation, or do you kind of agree with me about it?
No, I agree with you. I think reading this again, if these are true, I see that, these were clearly false statements. They were material. And look, it's materiality, the way the courts have interpreted that is very, very favorable to the government. And what that means is, it isn't enough to lie. It has to have the ability not only it isn't just that it would change the government's behavior, I forget the exact wording, but it has the potential to change it. And courts have interpreted that very favorably to the government. And that you can make, materiality arguments on the part of a government attorney are very easy to make in some ways. Even in that context, I had an issue with the materiality in the Sussman false statement. I don't have that here with Danchenko. I mean, clearly we were spending a lot of resources trying to get to the bottom of who the subsources were, trying to figure out what information they might have. And so these false statements did make a difference, did consume FBI resources, did prevent us from either doing things one way or the other that we might have otherwise not done. Now, the irony and what aggravates me to no end is that kind of consistent reading of materiality got thrown out the window when it came to Mike Flynn, where you had everybody from Bill Barr to career prosecutors in the District of Columbia saying his lies weren't material at all. Well, bullshit. His lies were 100 times more material than anything Danchenko is alleged to have done here. And for them to sit there and argue in court before a district judge that they were immaterial, and that's why, one of the reasons why they're pulling out of his charges and his sentencing at the time, strikes me that's one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in the Trump administration, as far as I'm concerned. What I would say about this indictment, it's 39 pages long. And if you look and you go through and you say, of those 39 pages, how many relate to the specific false statements that Danchenko is alleged to have made? It's a small subset of that. You have a lot of atmospherics in there. You have things in there talking about Hillary Clinton. You have things in there talking about the Democratic Party. You have things in there talking about PR Executive One and his past relationship with the Democratic Party and the Clintons. Now, is that important to understand that his motivations matter? Yes. Is it necessary to consume over half of your indictment when you're facing criticism that you're a partisan actor and you might really maybe want to try and present an objective face to the products coming out of your investigation so that the 65% of the population who looks at you maybe as a political actor set up by Bill Barr, that you might not want to play into that? In my opinion, that's something you maybe want to consider. And they do things, I was reading it saying, paragraph 7, over time, the FBI attempted to investigate, vet, and analyze the company reports, but ultimately was not able to confirm or corroborate most of their substantive allegations. That's absolutely true. You know what else is absolutely true? We couldn't disprove most of the substantive allegations. Is that relevant to an objective reader? Yes. If you write things like that way, does it lead an objective observer to question your motivations and the way you're writing it? In my opinion, yeah, of course it does. So I've got a little bit of an issue continuing with the way the sort of this agenda behind the actual charges, which appears to be going on, and the way that plays into, the frothy partisans on both sides of trying to define not Danchenko, not Sussman, but using that to try and make this a sort of judgment about the entire Russia investigations and the entire Special Counsel Mueller prosecutions, because that's That's what's really going on behind the scenes there. This is, Danchenko did wrong, allegedly, in my opinion, deserves to be charged, deserves to be prosecuted. But the rest of this surrounding froth is designed to inform that other debate that's going on, and in my opinion is unprofessional and uncalled for.
Okay, so let's break that down for a minute because I think you're making 2 points here. One is that there is a separate agenda here, and I want to come to that second because I think that's the more controversial point that you're making, and I think the more interesting one. But the first one is that that there's a lot of unnecessary verbiage in here, and that was truer in the Sussman case where the entire body of the indictment was unnecessary verbiage designed to describe something. So when you put together the unnecessary verbiage of the Sussman indictment and the unnecessary verbiage in this indictment, what is the story that John Durham is trying to tell?
I think he's trying to point to a broader pattern of activity that people in or related to the Clinton campaign were engaged in a pattern of activity to dredge up information, oppo research, whatever you want to call it, and we're feeding that and providing that to the government, not only the FBI, but other players. And that this wasn't just a one-off exercise, that there were multiple attempts, whether it was through Sussman and the Alpha Bank material, and whether it was the material that, a company like Fusion GPS, who had been hired by Perkins Coie, who was employing Steele at some point in time to gather this information, that there are all these things that were being fed into the government, and I think his theory of the case were being done so corruptly. And I don't quite, it's dirty and it's messy, but it's what political campaigns do. And it's certainly not new to the 2016 presidential election, and it's certainly not exclusive to the Democrats. I mean, you had Peter Schweizer's book, Clinton Cash, that was being passed around the halls of FBI headquarters. I mean, this is the nature of political campaigns, one. And two, everybody looks at oppo research like the word of the devil. Well, usually it's unverified information that is sometimes correct or might be exaggerated. But, at the end of the day, the best point I think that Durham could make is if the FBI had full information about the provenance of this information, they might have treated it differently and been more skeptical broadly about the information that was coming in. But I don't think the Alpha Bank stuff didn't go anywhere. The FBI looked at it and said, it's anomalous, so that's not a lie. But we don't think it's nefarious activity. Could it have been made up? Who knows? We looked at the Steele information and said, I can't make heads or tails of this. Can't refute it, can't corroborate it. But at the end of the day, it mattered to Carter Page. It mattered to Carter Page's FISA, but it didn't matter to George Papadopoulos or Mike Flynn or Paul Manafort.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
All of this other stuff that was really the main thrust of the investigations.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute because I think that's one of the themes going around on the right, and you see this all over the place as Durham has developed this material, is that this constitutes sort of the Russia investigation imploding. And so I'm interested, and you and I've written about this and you've spoken about it, that's actually quite wrong. And that this is really one corner of the Russia investigation. And it's one corner that never led anywhere anyway. So walk us through what the Alpha Bank shit and the Carter Page stuff actually affected, and then which parts of the Mueller investigation and the Russia investigation it had nothing to do with.
Sure. Well, I think what they affected, the The Steele material was integral to a lot of the stuff in the investigation on Carter Page. It was not, and so to the extent, and Alpha Bank was almost a one-off. That was like a project of a allegation that came in. Go look at it. There was some, connection there to the dossier as well. Go look at it and figure out what to make of this technical data. And
Can
those
you
two
wait?
things.
Can you just really quickly explain what Alpha Bank is?
Yeah, so it was, again, my understanding, and I was not different, like our cyber guys handled looking at that and kind of teasing out what it meant or didn't mean. Essentially, there was information through DNS records that a email server with some association to the Trump domain had contact, not necessarily like email flow, but like DNS lookup type information with I believe, a server, but maybe not a server, but an entity connected online with Alpha Bank. And it was
Right.
posited that this might represent a covert communications channel between Trump and Russia. And so,
Okay.
again, the point being, but at the end, but it didn't go anywhere. And again, this isn't unusual. When you have a complex investigation, you will have 40 threads, 30 threads going out, and easily a quarter of them are dry holes. They aren't accurate, they don't pan out, you can't pursue them any further. But the notion that, these things, we followed them up and there was nothing, we couldn't
What do you mean,
find
like
or
an
prove up
investigation
anything.
like the Durham investigation, or like an investigation
No,
into
no, no, no,
anything
no.
like
Like
the
the
dossier?
Russia investigations, right? Like the
Okay.
Russia investigation. So when they started out and we had all these characters we were looking at, and then sometimes you get to the end, it's still strange, but you just can't prove it any further. And you certainly can't get to criminal charges. But these were too discrete and small. Like, if you talk about the size of the pie, these are two tiny little slices. Again, for Carter Page in his life, it's not a tiny little slice. But in terms of the context of
It
what
all
the
strikes me as
FBI was
super
looking at.
circumstantial. Like, I mean, you get enough circumstantial things, like then you start having, as you said, they're not really dry holes anymore, and there's like a little bit more
Yeah,
of a
but
connection.
sure, but there are reasons to do, like, look, when the allegations like Alpha come in, it is that's what the FBI job, the eye is to investigate, right? I mean, we get information and allegations, we investigate it, and that's it. Oh, you're out to get, no, we're out to do our job. We have to, when there are allegations, go out and run them to ground. We did the same thing with the Obama administration. We did the same thing with the Clinton administration. We did the same thing with the Bush administration. That just foreign intelligence services are interested in presidential administrations. This isn't a partisan
Sure.
proposition. That just is. And so, though, when you get to it, because there were so many issues with the Steele information, with the Carter Page FISA, the tendency is for people who are looking for a reason to say, oh, this whole thing was a Russia hoax, to take the problems and say, this is indicative of all of it. Well, Steele didn't predicate the Russia investigations. There were Steele and the dossier, and Igor Danchenko and Sussman had nothing to do with George Papadopoulos or Mike Flynn or Paul Manafort or Roger Stone or the IRA hackers or the GRU hackers or, Vander Wan or
Right.
whatever the hell his name was. All these people who were investigated and prosecuted, first by the FBI in most of the cases, and then later by Special Counsel Mueller. And none of that has any relevance to Danchenko and Sussman. But yet you see, for the first time, Mueller is mentioned, that Durham brings up in paragraph 5. He talks about Special Counsel Mueller. And again, so it's drawing in because some of those Carter Page FISAs were renewed during the conduct of the Special Counsel's investigation. So again,
So are you
that
saying that this is
relevant?
like, it's just a totally like that has just been used as an excuse for a dragnet? Is that like, I mean, more or less like?
No, I don't think so. I think it is relevant to point to the fact that the Special Counsel's investigation was a serious endeavor, that the alleged misrepresentation and lies, the false statements by Danchenko, were relevant to FISAs that were renewed underneath the sort of, the imprimatur of Mueller's activities, even though it was the FBI doing that and the FBI personnel. But to say serious endeavor, these false statements had real impact and real consequence. And so, again, to me, that is a reasonable thing to do. But when I start reading all this gilding the lily of all these other things of Clinton and everything, I start wondering, it no longer starts to appear to me as just a very, and compare and contrast, if you have the time, pull up the indictments from Special Counsel Mueller. They
Sure.
don't look like this. They're going to be,
Yeah,
they are speaking indictments.
They're really spare.
They do speak, right? I mean, he lays out a factual case, not only of just the bare bones of establishing the elements of the crime. There's more there, but it's not like this. And I can tell you, because of personal firsthand knowledge, there was in part a deliberate decision to do that, to appear absolutely objective and apolitical, and not allow yourself to play into one narrative or the other. And I think this indictment, and certainly Sussman's indictment, allow both sides of the political spectrum to argue that it supports something that it actually doesn't, or that it's pointing to something that it actually doesn't. And I think that's a shame.
So, okay, and this is perhaps a dumb question, but like, it has seemed to me that almost every official investigation in my lifetime, like, I guess mostly I'm thinking the Starr investigation and the ones that we've talked about today, have gone far afield of their original mandate and have like effectively ended up becoming political endeavors. Like, so I guess one of the things I'm wondering is like, I completely, I agree with you in everything.
Except Mueller, who didn't do that and has been criticized for it.
Yes. Fair enough. That's right. Correct. But what I guess I'm saying is like, when you compare this to like the Starr investigation, which started with Whitewater and ends with Monica Lewinsky, what is literal, like, why is like, it almost strikes me as like, in a way, like, I don't know. I just think that like, are we back to business as usual with investigations? Like, is that like a little bit of like what we're seeing here?
That's always, I mean, long-running investigations will naturally tend to do that. They will take you down paths where you started, where you thought you were going, isn't where you thought you ended up. I totally butchered the grammar of that sentence. You end up frequently in investigations in a place you didn't anticipate when you started. Say it that way. When you put an overlay of somebody who is a special counsel or somebody who is appointed to do a job, there is absolutely, acknowledged or not, a recognition that at the end, you should probably have something to show for your efforts. And if your initial target that you went out to do, and let's remember, it's like, I brought in John Durham to look at the origins of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, the beginnings of the investigation, because according to the Attorney General, William Barr, this was the most, corrupt undermining of a president in our nation's history, and it's horrible and it's bad and it's going to be exposed as such, and I never want it to happen again in the nation's history. Well, that clearly didn't pan out. And so now, again, legitimately or not, you've gotten to a place where, there was somebody who provided false information to the FBI that was incorporated into a FISA that achieved and got warrants to, conduct electronic surveillance of a U.S. person. And that's, in my opinion, again, if accurate as alleged, a false statement worthy of prosecuting. But it's not the core of what
it's not the core of
do.
things.
It's not even close to it. And so again,
this is my entire shtick with 1001 anyway. Like, this is like always, it's like some type of fucking consolation prize. Like, I don't know.
But this is, again, I think, as alleged, this is a legitimate charge. It's just, one option would have been, what did you see Robert Mueller do? You saw Robert Mueller kick off spin-off prosecutions of like Bijan Rafikian, this knucklehead who was involved with Flynn and drafting and doing work for Turkey. There are ways you can either, and again, there are any number of reasons that none of us outside of that circle of people deciding know, why you want to stay and continue to do it yourself, why you just don't spin it off to the local U.S. Attorney's Office and let them prosecute. But where they've landed, particularly in the context of what at least as I read it, the underlying sort of movement of this, huge ship in the background seems to be an idea that there was this great Democratic Hillary Clinton-based conspiracy to feed multiple types of bad information to the FBI and enlisted the unwitting assistance of the FBI to discredit and undermine Trump's presidency. And I just don't see that.
Yeah, though there is, I would add, a little bit of a minor embarrassing paragraph for Durham toward that, if he's trying to advance that thesis where he basically admits, I don't have it in front of me, that the Hillary Clinton campaign did not direct and was unaware of these activities.
I think he says that PR public relations official once said that, I think is what
exactly
he puts in there.
All right, so before we go to audience questions, and I want to leave time for audience questions, I just want to flesh out this point that you made about it being serious, but not central. And so let's concede at the outset, and I really, you've said this and I really agree, that if these allegations are true, it is a case that, a traditional case of the sort that the Justice Department typically prosecutes, and that the FBI insists that the Justice Department prosecutes. Because if there's one thing the FBI will follow you to the ends of the earth about, it is lying to the FBI. There is no greater sin in the minds of the average FBI special agent than causing a false statement to be recorded in a FBI 302. I'm not asking you to agree with that, Pete. I'm just taking your silence as assent. That said, I'm trying to imagine how the world would be different if, Igor Danchenko had told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so can we agree that life would have been easier for Carter Page, right? He may or may not have had a FISA application against him or the surveillance resulting from it?
I don't know. And I want to be careful because Carter Page has sued like 12 of us or some number of over.
Yes, Carter Page has
FISA.
Pending litigation against our desk.
Look, I would say this, the FBI surveils all kinds of people. The vast majority of them, that never becomes public. So again, the job of the FBI is to investigate, and I'll defend that till the end of my days. And it's also incumbent for those investigations to remain confidential. So
certainly not.
I don't know. I don't know that I would
CIA.
agree that. And I think I've said this before, maybe on the show. I do believe that absent the Steele material, there was or would have been sufficient probable cause to get at least a FISA initiation. Again, the weird thing is I would never say that, but the government has declassified so much of the applications and the process around that. I think that's fair to say, that in my experience, I think that would have occurred. I don't know and wouldn't want to speculate about renewals. But again, to the point of these Danchenko and the Steele material was absolutely relevant in the context of the Carter Page investigation.
All right, so we can say that the Carter Page FISA application would have been more complicated, and the renewals would certainly have been more complicated had Danchenko been entirely truthful, assuming he was not.
They would have looked different.
Okay, and part of the Russia investigation depended on the Carter Page FISA for its, imagine the Carter Page FISA investigation, FISA surveillance had never happened. How many words of the Mueller report would have been different?
Very few. I don't know what he devotes to Carter Page, but it's de minimis. And another thing, I was iterating out all the things that, one small point. When I iterated all the things that Danchenko and Sussman had nothing to do with, they had nothing to do with Volume 2 of the Mueller report. So all those acts of obstruction that I'm curious, because Trump couldn't be, per OLC opinion, prosecuted while he was in office. He's not in office anymore, so I'm curious what's going on with that. But anyway, just wanted to drop that in there.
So Carter Page FISA doesn't happen. The Mueller report is still the same report, right? Minus a page and a half about Carter Page.
That's right.
All right. Let's talk about a few specific individuals. George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to making false statements. to the FBI about the origins, about the circumstances in which he met a certain professor that led to the beginning of the Mueller investigation, would that have been affected had Mr. Danchenko told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
No, I can't think of any case other than.
How about Paul Manafort?
No.
How about Rick Gates?
Nope.
The famous Michael Flynn, who's been out today, apparently, would his case have been materially affected?
Not at all. What's he doing today? That's very exciting.
What about the Troll Farm case, the Internet Research Agency? Would that have been different?
Not a bit.
So he was never prosecuted, but he was indicted. The famous other KK, the one who's not Kate Klonick, but Konstantin Kalimnik, who is, by the way, Kate, also known as KK.
I gotta, you should have told me that beforehand. I told you that. That was my nickname.
I've told you that a few times, actually, and you respond with shock every time.
Okay.
What about KK?
No.
Okay. What about the 12 Russian military intelligence officers who were accused of the hacking and dumping operation?
No, none of them.
No, that wouldn't have been affected by this. What about Michael Cohen?
Nope.
Roger Stone?
Cohen. No, not Roger Stone.
Okay, so
not Lev Parnas, not Igor Fruman, not.
What about the Richard Nixon tattoo on Roger Stone's back?
That would have been affected.
I'm waiting for that to get indicted on its
way
own.
Worse than dog shirts. All right, so can we say that this is a case that the Justice Department in the regular course of business would normally bring, and it is not inconsequential, nobody's arguing it's trivial, but that it in no way implicates the larger Russia investigation as the far right describes, a hoax?
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. And that, again, that is the aggravating part when you read some of the more inflammatory or non-central things that are in these two indictments. They are universally designed to fan that narrative. They're not tampering.
There is an effort to rewrite history going on here.
There's a feeding of this extreme narrative, deliberate or not, that when you get this sort of extraneous detail about the machinations in the Democratic campaigns or the Hillary Clinton campaign, that it feeds into this narrative that this is the kind of some story of the Russian investigations, where it's clearly not.
All right. I am discriminating wildly in my choice of audience questions today based on questions that I would have asked. So I'm letting the audience channel me. Hence, our first two questions are from Paula and Charles. Paula, you showed up on screen first, though I asked Charles on first, so you go first.
Okay, so my question is, what is the liability for the other actors who didn't lie? And I know you alluded to this, making a political oppo isn't new, although I feel like, putting in the newspaper that someone's having an affair versus putting out information that the FBI is using is quite different. And I don't think the DNC is that stupid. I don't think that they thought that they were getting such high quality info. But again, I don't know what the level of knowledge you need to have, or I don't know, stupidity for hiring someone, whether it be Fusion GPS, you need for liability.
So this is a super important question, and I want to refine it just a little bit.
No.
Paula, this is where the host gets to mute the audience member and dismiss her from the screen and then refine her question. So there are a bunch of other actors who are implicated here. One is Chris Steele himself. One is the DNC or the Clinton campaign, which hires them. There's the PR executive, right? There's a bunch of people, and you know, one thing that you got to wonder about is whether Durham is thinking about some kind of a conspiracy indictment to defraud the United States that involves a much wider array of people. Igor Danchenko is somebody that most people have never heard of. Do you think he's the final act here, or is he, or is the idea that this theory is building towards something larger?
I don't know. I think like anytime, like look, there's if you go in there again, I have read who I believe to be the actual identity of whatever they call it, public relations executive, PR executive one. In the indictment, there's a paragraph that lays out such granular biographical detail about him. It's not, they could have said, if the point was to say, hey, he's been affiliated with Democrats and Democratic political campaigns and other entities, they could have said it just like that. But they lay out in very specific biographical detail, more than enough for an informed observer or researcher to go and figure out exactly who it is, which has been done. And, his name's out there and I'm not going to talk about it. Same thing for whatever they call the Russian former head of the Chamber of Commerce. Very easy to figure out who it is. So if you're a private citizen, there's a little bit of an aspect of like, okay, if you're not going to charge me, but then you're putting enough information in here in your indictment that everybody's going to go out there and start throwing my name around and speculating about me, well, you're doing damage to my reputation. So if the goal of that is ultimately to get there and charge them as some part of a broader conspiracy, fine. But if you're not going to do it, it's a little bit irresponsible. I, again, have always been told, yeah, sometimes you write things to dirty up the person you're charging, but when you start dirtying up third parties, that's kind of, in my experience with prosecutors, always frowned upon, even when they're like guys we didn't like, we're charging this guy, but we don't like him. Let's say something nasty. No, we're not going to do it. You don't do that. So again, to your question, Ben, my gut sense is I don't think this is it. I don't, for all the people on Twitter sending me pictures of John Durham looking through the peephole, and I'm not at all in the slightest worried about, anybody, me or anybody that I worked with facing any criminal exposure whatsoever. Might there be other people involved in this conspiracy outside of the government? Maybe, but conspiracies are hard.
If you were concerned about criminal liability, would you be on in lieu of fun?
No, I in fact would not be on lieu of fun. And, for all your audience doesn't know, I might be on a shackled on my feet, my arms free, and this is really a fake backdrop on the plane to Guantanamo as we speak. And who's to know, Ben?
Yeah.
But my sense is that there might be more there. But again, conspiracies are difficult, are challenging cases to actually establish the evidentiary level you need to demonstrate and prove up a conspiracy is significant. So if that's where he's heading, maybe he's got a bunch of really incriminating evidence that we haven't seen. And, all the people are saying, oh, he's starting at the bottom and working up. Maybe. I highly doubt it, but I don't know that this is all of it. But I have no belief that it is going to end in indictments and arrests of me, anybody in the FBI, anybody in the U.S. government, Hillary Clinton, her immediate staff. I don't truly have any belief that that is ever going to happen.
Can I ask a question? How is it going to end, and when? Like, when is this just going to be over?
That's a great question. I think that is a great question, and there's a reasonable, again, this is a reasonable prosecution. So, from what Merrick Garland said, I think during his Senate Judiciary hearing, or maybe it was H House, but I think it was SJC, that he said essentially like, you can assume that his budget was renewed. He kind of said yes without saying yes. So to the extent, I don't know, it doesn't have to be renewed on an annual basis as far as I know. I took it to mean that, he's going to run out the work until it's done. But again, given a complex investigation, I know I could investigate if I wanted to and for decades. And that's always the other thing, is to sit there and saying something, again, comparing and contrasting. Director Mueller was very specific, and as was Rod Rosenstein. Your mandate is narrow. Stay focused on your mandate. Don't go chasing things that come up. If they come up, then spin them off to university, to U.S. attorney offices. stay focused on your appointment order, and don't start running down all these rabbit holes. This is kind of starting to feel like a rabbit hole. And that doesn't mean it's not a legitimate prosecution, but it does make me start to say, again, also in the context of we don't have answers to the counterintelligence threat that was posed by Donald Trump. We don't have answers to whether or not he committed obstruction in a way that he might be prosecuted for. We don't have a lot of answers for really bad behavior that occurred in 2016, 17, 18, 19, but we sure as hell still have a damn special counsel who continues to be looking at the investigators, or people now related to the investigators who are providing information to them, that is going gangbusters, full steam ahead. And in terms of the priorities of the Department of Justice, I do have some question about whether or not those are appropriately ranked and resourced. Having said that, I mean, A.G. Garland's in an impossible position. He can't stop, in a reasonable way what, kind of the work of what Durham's doing right now. So, I think he's in a place where he has to let it run until it's in. But I would hope, if we're still having this conversation next summer, God help us. So I would hope, we see some sort of resolution, some sort of report, whatever that looks like in, the next 3 to 6 months. But I have no idea.
Charles T., you get the last question today.
I guess my question is, do you think the Danchenko indictment has the potential to have a similar chilling effect on how the FBI recruits and handles confidential human sources that the Sussman indictment, did, or do you think the Sussman indictment may have as far as the FBI conducting counterintelligence activities?
I do, and I think every one of these is a balancing test. I think this is a much more legitimate, in my mind, the balance here is easier for me to make an argument that Danchenko was appropriately charged, as alleged, at least. I have some concern that, it starts talking about his, people he was talking to and their subsources. And, any time at the end of the day, it is when the FBI, when you rely on somebody talking to you and you're sitting there trying to tell them, look, because I don't know how many people I'll tell you this, but it can't get out. Yeah, of course, it'll never get out. Well, stuff is getting out. So that doesn't, there is a beneficial government goal in having sources not lie to the FBI. There's a beneficial government goal in having people knowing and seeing as a deterrent effect that if I go in there and I, make stuff up and cause the FBI to do things because of a lie, that I'm breaking the law. That has a beneficial effect, but it also, again, to the point I made in the article I wrote for Lawfare most sources, again, confidential human sources on the way to source who walks into a general counsel's office, aren't always forthright, usually aren't forthright completely. And that's the norm. That's usual. It is not unusual at all. So I think you have to be very careful when you do start charging it. It doesn't mean they're immune from, that they get away with lying, or they can't be, or shouldn't be sanctioned. And I think in Danchenko's case, I agree that he should. But I do think it's something that should be approached very thoughtfully and carefully. And I don't know that Sussman was, from what I've seen.
We are going to leave it there. Pete Strzok, you're a great American. Even though you will not don a dog shirt.
Never. Not unless the price. A fundraiser
like
of
even,
sufficient
make eye contact
a fundraiser for a good cause of sufficient size.
We've given you a couple weeks to think about this. So what is the amount that the In Lieu of Fun audience would have to raise for what charity to make you don a dog shirt and tell and play Where's the Lie?
No, I don't want to make him play Where's the Lie.
I do
actually feel like that really compromises him in a lot of ways. But I do want the dog shirt. How about an Ask Me Anything or Ask Me Some Things with Pete and a dog shirt for charity?
No. It's got to be Where's the Lie. How much money for what charity?
Oh God, a lot. And there's several many quality charities, especially in this day and age, we're heading into the winter, and food banks and such, that there's a lot. there's a lot. So I have no.
Notice that I don't have the name of a charity or a sum of money.
Also, do we get to pick the dog shirt?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, dear.
But we will be back tomorrow. 22 hours and 59 minutes from now. It will be cheese night. There will be cheese. There may be, Luke. You never know. There'll be wine. It'll be just us. And until then, Kate?
We don't have fun anymore. But we still have materialized the FBI and non-materialized the FBI. And the FBI.
Which count as
and
material.
Yes, exactly. Which count as material.
Just don't lie to the FBI.
Don't lie to the FBI.
Don't talk to them at all if you can avoid it.
No talk.
That's obstruction.
That's legal advice.
Talk and tell the truth. Tell the truth.
Call your lawyer.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.